I'm going to show you a slice of irony. Would you agree that freedom of speech is the opposite of fascism? And vice versa, of course. They're diametrically opposed, they're set apart. You can't have both, in other words. You either got freedom of speech or you got fascism. You with me? Probably not. So here's an account shopping things around. I'm going to try to leave a comment. There's 14 comments in there. Yeah? And it looks like 32,000 people have seen this. But I'm not allowed to leave a comment on here because these kids cater to patently fascist censorship. They'll show people things like this. I'm not following this account, mind you. But you can't interact with it. It is a public account, which means I should be able to interact with it. But then again, out of blush, this kid is using emojis. Who do you think fucking wrote that into the algorithm? And most of you probably don't know what I'm talking about. This kid also is marginalizing people and misleading them by example by listing pronouns. And if you look closely, you'll see ADHD, which does not exist. It never did, and it never will. Some of you might have your assumptions about me right now. The food supply was hijacked because gullible people who are by all rights, I think good people, were trained to refer to food which was full of light and life. Hear me out. Think about what I have to say. They were trained to refer to food as organic. It was renamed. It was rebranded. And that opened up the door to genetically modified poison. They were also these people, I'm talking about our ancestors, our forefathers, respectively. They were also trained to essentially, say the farm is not where we should live. We should move into the city based on propaganda. And here we are, most of us, not all, but one too many. These were divisive tactics put forward to subjugate the masses. Now you look at, people that live in the city, for the most part, most of us are pretty fucking helpless. We're pretty useless. If we didn't have all these modern conveniences to lean on, we are pretty fucking useless. And that's exactly why these agendas were carried out. So back to ADHD. If your gut is not healthy because you're eating poison, because the food supply was hijacked and weaponized, cognitive functions, in other words, your brain will not fucking work. Not like it should. And by degrees, this is going to further promote a disharmonious system, opposed to the system you and I are a part of, which is abundant. It renews itself. This is why there's a cyclic process of birth and death, or death and birth, each and every calendar cycle, because that's how it works. If you've ever cut yourself, your body will heal. This is how it works. I'm talking about, from small scale to the large scale, or the microcosm to the macrocosm. But most people buy into the propaganda. They repeat the propaganda. They are technically the fucking problem. Case in point, this is the post that we're talking about. Yeah. Let's see what else they put in here. This one, right? Yeah, that's the one that we were first working with. If you look closely, you got Trump in there. Do you really think Trump is pulling all of these strings? If you assume as much, you're as superficial as they come. Trump is a steward of the District of Columbia, which was established in 1871 under the Organic Act. This converted America into a corporation. Google won't tell you that because we're using the Zionist DARPA internet, unfortunately. And if you assume otherwise, I recommend you pull your head out of your ass, look around, and put in the time. What I also just said, you have to appreciate this because people don't have a clue. I'm pro-Palestine, which means I support people who were born and raised and live in the land of Canaan. This means I'm not anti-Semitic. And if you don't understand what I just said, you are a pseudo-intellectual. I recommend you sit with what I said. In other words, open your eyes instead of your mouth. I'm not concerned with your reactions based on popular opinion and hearsay because you're more than willing to march in lockstep, ironically, with your horse blinders on, which brings us full circle with this garbage. No one waxes poetic about a fucking president. No one's sensible. Because that promotes the Hegelian dialectic, which is fascism in practice. An example of this, which you should be familiar with, the Civil War is a prime example of the Hegelian dialectic, fascism in practice. Blue versus red, black versus white, same difference, and there shouldn't be any of this garbage afoot, but most people catered to it. The algorithm exclusively promotes propaganda today because the algorithm, how should I put it? This is the age of disinformation and patently fascist censorship because a bunch of brain dead people started referring to fascism, censorship, the opposite of freedom of speech, as shadow banning, canceling, polarizing, positive vibes only, hating, Snopes, debunked, and the list goes on. You see what I did there? That's the same methodology, the same modus operandi as referring to food as organic, which opened up the door to genetically modified poison. In this case, kids were spoon-fed censorship culture, fascism culture, but they call it cancel culture. And most people bought into it, and it's been normalized because anything that's well-financed and well-circulated is normalized. All of these things that I'm complaining about are red flags, but most people are marching in lockstep with those horse blinders on that I mentioned earlier. What the fuck do I know? What the fuck do I know? Oh, one last thing. Obama. Some of you might think, oh, but he was a good president. The way they work, if you're paying attention to patterns, you get a good cop, a bad cop. If you understand what you're talking about, because you're using that brain, between your ears and the heart beating beneath your chest in tandem, there are no good cops. If you look into it, they haven't been legally bound to protect the public for decades. Only to generate revenue for the trilateral city-states. I shit you not. I shit you not. And they do have quotas between the states. I shit you not. Some of you know aspects of my background. They do. Depends on which state you're in. And who knows, maybe it's all of them now. You never know. I was going to rattle off something else, but most of you probably didn't sit through this and or give two shits anyhow. Oh, Obama. Before I go, just to prove my point. These are a number of examples that took place during the Obama administration, and I've held on to them all these years because most people assume that Obama was one of the good ones. Obama fast-tracked something known as the TPP. It's the Trans-Pacific Partnership, One Belt, One Road. It's a commerce superhighway. It's also known as the Silk Highway. These are also old-school names applied to this new thing, which should not exist, but it does because our masters are laughing at us. You could look up the Silk Highway or the Silk Road. Having to do with physical commerce trades in the days of old. But most people don't have a clue and or don't care what I have to say. What this did was there were a number of toll booths, respectively, and they isolated the different aspects of the AI. The AI is one sentient, so you could think of it as Legion if you want to call it a demon or whatever. But it's schizophrenic, for the lack of better words, and these are the different aspects of its personality that you interact with. These used to be, I can't say the word compartmentalized, I can't say it, but they were isolated. The TPP, the Trans-Pacific Partnership, opened up all of these toll booths. That's how I think of it. So now it's creeping through all things Wi-Fi. Why would that be a problem? Having to do with fascists and fascism and the opposite of freedom of speech. Because the AI is also governing, quite literally, it's running the algorithms, which are scrubbing the internet for keywords, phrases, images that have been deemed unacceptable. And yet, freedom of speech should exist regardless of the fucking medium. But most people also believe that community guidelines is a good thing, and because you consented to it, it's okay. It would not exist if you and I were surrounded by smart people. Obama also, you ever heard of the Patriot Act, which shouldn't exist? Because that means it's a nice way of saying we're going to do away with your innate natural rights, and we're going to call them civil liberties and take more of them away from you so that you're safe. Be scared so that you consent to this. And people did. The Obama administration renewed the Patriot Act right before it was about to expire because it was always going to be renewed, and they extended it. In other words, they did away with even more civil liberties. This is during, the good cop administration. These are just a couple examples. Obama also had more drone-related deaths than the previous quote-unquote presidents or stewards of the District of Columbia, as symbolized by the Washington Monument. These things should keep you up at night. But I don't know anybody who knows this information and or cares about this information. And this is old now, but this is the groundwork which paved the way for what we're experiencing today. In other words, these things matter because our masters are playing the long game. And most people have their heads so far up their ass, they are the problem, and that's why things are getting bad, exponentially speaking. What the fuck do I know? I'm trying to help you. But wait, there's more. I find this troubling, and you would too if you were thinking about it. So if you scroll through here, and what I mean by troubling is you can bump into damn near anybody and they're going to repeat, they're going to reaffirm propaganda again and again and again and again and again. So this says, ICE are the domestic terrorists. Why would I have an issue with this? Anybody? I brought up the Patriot Act. The only reason the Patriot Act existed in the first place is because there was... come on, work. Hold on. These little fucking things are in the way. Because jargon was spoon-fed to people having to do with terrorism and terrorists. And if you look into it, yeah, it doesn't date to 2001 specifically. Our masters started conditioning people to buy into this garbage much earlier in time in terms of decades. You remember people, bringing bombs on planes and all kinds of other wacky stuff? Yeah? Anybody? Yeah, bombs in buildings, things like that. You could also look up the MK Ultra sub-projects. You could familiarize yourself with the terminology psychic driving, specifically having to do with EWEN, that's the first name, Ewan, or Ian Cameron is the last name. He knocked out psychic driving, and that's what people refer to as brainwashing these days. But if you look up psychic driving, you can figure out what it consists of. And if you understand what it consists of, you'll realize, you should quickly realize that these are the very tactics that are employed in programming propaganda on the box and the big screen, in books, in music, but more specifically on the DARPA internet on free social media platforms. Yeah, MK Ultra sub-project tactics. To what? You would probably think of it as brainwashing. It's really psychic driving. You're being conditioned because you and I have been had. The same applies to buying into something like terrorism or terrorists and repeating the jargon. Most people today would whine at me. Most people have. And say, well, I'm just going to keep doing it. Because they're not thinking about why I just took time and energy to say what I just said. Because they're not thinking at all. Another example, you hear people wax poetic about, conspiracy theory and conspiracy theorist. This is another one that's old hat. Bad pun if you think of tinfoil. So JFK, right, he got shot in the head, would you agree? And more likely than not, it was an act of greater magic, a blood sacrifice. That's neither here nor there, because you probably have assumptions. The reason I mention this is conspiracy theorist and conspiracy theory. These are two social engineering buzzwords that were tossed around to defame anybody who spoke out against the quote-unquote official findings of the Warren Commission following JFK's assassination. The best part is, flash forward to 2001, having to do with an act of greater magic, a blood sacrifice, 9/11, which I still don't know anybody who symbolically understands what that represents and why it was carried out. I don't know a single person. I would like to, but I don't still. I hope that changes. Flash forward to 2001, and people were still throwing around, what? Conspiracy theory and conspiracy theorist to defame anyone who pointed out that there were fucking charges in the building and multiple people. And there's so much to the fucking 9/11 shit, but just the same. There are eyewitnesses. There's video footage. Keep in mind, that stuff's doctored now, too. And it was doctored then as well, if you think of planes and other things. There's more to this, and most of you probably assume otherwise. Just the same. Also, look up, in terms of doctored footage and what have you, this stuff goes back to NIVIDIA, I think is how you spell it, software. It's one of the firms that started pushing this type of garbage, which is why now you can't trust anything on the DARPA internet. And supposedly, kids don't want to live around a bunch of phonies, they don't want to interact with phony people. But how many people have been conditioned to augment their bodies? How many people were conditioned to use yet another social engineering buzzword, which is in place to what? Do away with freedom of speech and promote patently fascist censorship. Another example is quite literally shopping around the word fake. How's that for irony? Fake news, do you remember that? The reason that was shopped around was to do away with freedom of speech. I shit you not. And most people bought into it hook, line, and sinker. If you sat through this message, color me impressed. If you would, type boom in the comment section so I know people are actually watching these things and or seeing them. It's been pretty discouraging. Thanks for hanging out. And what the fuck do I know? I know some of you are thinking it based on your assumptions, right? What a dickhead. But if you put in the time what I related to you, it leads somewhere, it means something. It's not fuck all, unlike what is being currently shopped around by the algorithm. Assume I'm wrong.